My wife's betrayal. I'm giving you 7 days to prove you're worth keeping. Day 1, I revised. A stranger, you deserve more. And now she's so livid. Imagine being in the most critical business meeting of your career, pitching a multi-million-dollar deal that could change everything, and your phone buzzes with a performance evaluation from your wife. An actual, 5-page, HR-style review of your marriage. The fluorescent lights of the conference room felt particularly harsh that day, casting a sterile glow on the faces of the 3 senior executives. Outside, the city hummed with opportunity, but inside me, a cold dread had just begun to unfurl, silently, behind my professional smile. I was right there, deep in the thick of it, trying to land a $2.8 million contract. My phone buzzed, a message from Chloe. The subject line alone, husband performance evaluation, urgent, followed by a 5-page PDF attachment, made my stomach drop. But I couldn't look. I couldn't. This was my career moment. So, I silenced it, pushed it away, and forced myself back into the pitch. The presentation went flawlessly. Handshakes all around, promises of a decision by Friday. Walking out, I felt like I was floating, like I'd just conquered Everest. Then I got to my car, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked my phone. And the world tilted. It was real. Formatted like a corporate HR document, complete with categories, scores out of 10, and excruciatingly detailed notes on my perceived failures. Financial contribution, a 6 out of 10. Why? Because I was meeting baseline expectations but showing no growth initiative. Emotional availability, a 4, because I worked too much. Romance, a pathetic 3, apparently for forgetting our 3-month anniversary, which, honestly, who even celebrates that? But the kicker, the part that slammed into me like a physical blow, was at the bottom, in bold red text, you have 7 days to prove you're worth staying married to. Don't disappoint me again. I just sat there, staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes? 20? I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just profoundly, utterly confused. When did my marriage become a job? A job I could apparently get fired from? Let me rewind a bit, give you some context for how Ethan, a 32-year-old regional sales manager pulling in $140,000 a year plus bonuses, found myself here. I own my house outright, bought it 6 years ago as a foreclosure and spent 2 years of my life fixing it up myself. I met Chloe about 10 months ago at my cousin's wedding. She was a bridesmaid, gorgeous, captivating, and we clicked instantly. She was 24, working as a marketing coordinator, seemingly ambitious and independent. We dated for 5 whirlwind months, got engaged, then married just 3 months later. Honestly, everything felt fine. Normal, even, until about 3 weeks after the wedding. That's when she quit her job. She said she wanted to focus on being a wife, on making our home perfect, on supporting my career so I could advance faster. At the time, it sounded sweet, like she was truly investing in us. I said, okay, thinking maybe she was just burned out and needed a break. But then, the spending started. Before we got married, Chloe was perfectly normal with money. She'd split checks, buy her own things, never expected me to cover everything. After the wedding, though, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly, she was ordering $300 worth of skincare products, signing up for a boutique gym that cost $200 a month, getting her hair done every 3 weeks at some impossibly fancy salon downtown. Now, I'm not cheap. I never have been. But I started noticing that every single week, there was another charge on our joint account for something she needed. A few months in, I tried to bring it up gently, asking if we could maybe budget a little better. She looked at me like I'd just insulted her entire existence. I gave up my career for you, she said, her voice dripping with accusation. The least you can do is make sure I'm taken care of. It felt manipulative, utterly manipulative, but I just didn't have the energy to fight about it. So, I let it go, figuring we'd work it out eventually. Fast forward to today, to this absolutely insane message, and I finally realized I'd been ignoring so many red flags. I'd wanted so badly to believe I'd made the right choice marrying her. I drove home in a daze, rehearsing different responses in my head, genuinely questioning if I was overreacting, or if this was truly as crazy as it felt. When I got home, Chloe was on the couch, glued to some reality show. She looked up at me with this expectant smile, like she was waiting for me to apologize for existing. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked past her into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. She followed, of course. "Did you get my message?" she asked. "Yeah, I got it," I replied, my voice flat. Right in the middle of the most important meeting of my career. She didn't even flinch. "Good. So, you understand? We need to have a serious conversation about our future." Her tone was so casual, so managerial, like I was an underperforming employee being called into her office. I looked at her. "Are you serious about this whole 7-day evaluation thing?" She nodded, completely serious. "Completely serious, Ethan. I've been unhappy for a while, and I need to see real change, or I don't think this is going to work." She talked like she was discussing returning a sweater that didn't fit. I stood there, really looking at her, and I saw someone I didn't recognize. This wasn't the woman I married, or maybe it was, and I was just too distracted to notice before. I took a deep breath and said something I'd been thinking for weeks but never had the courage to verbalize. "If you're evaluating me," I told her, my voice steady, "then I'm evaluating you, too. Consider this a mutual review period." Her face went blank for a second, like she hadn't expected me to push back at all. Then she let out this short, dismissive laugh. "Fine, evaluate away. I'm sure you'll realize pretty quickly that you're lucky to have me." She walked back to the couch, unpaused her show, and I went upstairs to my office, closing the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, not really sure what I was doing yet, but knowing that something fundamental had just changed. I pulled up our joint bank account and started scrolling through the last few months of transactions. What I found made my blood run cold. We were talking thousands of dollars. Clothes, restaurants, subscriptions to services I'd never even heard of. And the kicker? Her contribution to any of this was exactly zero. She hadn't worked, hadn't brought in any income, and hadn't even really managed the house, because we still ordered takeout 4 times a week, and I was the one who did most of the cleaning. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt something other than confusion. I felt clarity. If Chloe wanted to evaluate whether I was worth keeping, then I was going to evaluate whether this marriage was worth keeping. And I had a feeling I already knew what the answer was going to be. Day 2 of her evaluation, and I realized my wife wasn't a partner. She was a liability. I woke up at 6 a.m., like always. Showered, dressed for work. When I came downstairs, Chloe was still asleep in our bedroom, door closed. This wasn't unusual, she rarely got up before 10:30. But today, it hit differently. I was actively paying attention to what she actually did with her time. I made coffee, checked my emails, and before leaving for the office, I did something I'd never done before. I took my laptop with me instead of leaving it at home. I also called my brother, Daniel, and asked him if he could swing by the house later to pick up some tools I'd borrowed. Really, I was giving him a spare key and asking him to keep an eye on things, just in case the situation escalated. He agreed, no questions asked, because he's always been that kind of brother. On my lunch break, I logged into our joint account from my office and started building a spreadsheet. Every single transaction from the moment she quit her job, organized by category. It took me almost 2 hours, but by the end, I had a complete financial picture of our marriage. It was worse than I thought. Chloe had spent $9,200 in the 4 months since she quit working. Clothes, beauty treatments, restaurants with her friends, subscription boxes, online shopping, boutique fitness classes, and a dozen other things that had nothing to do with running a household. Her contribution to our joint expenses, groceries, utilities, mortgage, anything that actually kept our life running, was $0. I sat there, staring at the numbers, feeling like an absolute idiot for not catching this sooner. But I was busy working, trying to build a future, and I'd trusted her to be reasonable. That trust was clearly misplaced. I created a new checking account in my name only and transferred most of my money into it, leaving just enough in the joint account to cover the bills I knew were coming due that month. Then I called my buddy, Mark, who's a family lawyer, and asked if he had time for a drink after work. We met at a bar near his office around 7 p.m. I laid out the whole situation, the performance review, the spending, the entitlement, all of it. Mark listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said it. "Ethan, what you're describing sounds like financial manipulation. Someone who contributes nothing but demands everything, and then threatens to leave if you don't meet their standards? They're controlling you." He told me to document everything, take screenshots, save messages, keep records of all spending. Because if this went where he thought it was going, I'd need proof. Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. Chloe had been talking about me to mutual friends for months, complaining I was cheap, that I didn't appreciate her, that she could have done better. Mark said he hadn't wanted to tell me before because he thought it was just normal marriage venting. But combined with everything else, it painted a pretty clear picture of someone who'd been checked out of this relationship for a while. I drove home feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not because I was heartbroken, but because I was so incredibly angry at myself for missing all the signs. When I got there, Chloe was in the living room with her friend, Sarah. They were drinking wine and watching Netflix, and they both looked up when I walked in. Sarah left pretty quickly, mumbling something about needing to get home. I could tell from the look on her face that they'd been talking about me. Once she was gone, I sat down across from Chloe. "Have you been complaining about me to our friends?" I asked, directly. She got defensive immediately. Said I was being paranoid, that she was allowed to talk to her friends about her feelings. "That's fine," I told her, "but maybe don't post about it on Instagram where 3,000 people can see it." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she asked. I pulled up my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken during lunch. She'd posted a story yesterday about being married to someone who doesn't understand that maintaining yourself costs money. And another one this morning about cheap men who expect their wives to look expensive on a Walmart budget. She tried to laugh it off, said she was just venting, didn't think I'd see it. But I pointed out that it was public. Anyone, including my coworkers and family, could see it. She was humiliating me online while living off my income. She went quiet. Then she said something that genuinely shocked me. "Maybe if you made more money, I wouldn't have to complain." I just stared at her. I make $140,000 a year. We had no debt except a tiny mortgage, and she spent money like we were pulling in $500,000. I took a breath. The joint account is going to be for household expenses only from now on. My paycheck will go into a separate account. If you need money for personal things, you can get a job, like every other adult. She lost it. Started yelling about how I was trying to control her, how I'd promised to take care of her, how this wasn't what she signed up for. I stayed calm. I didn't sign up to be an ATM with a wedding ring. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership. And right now, I'm the only one contributing anything. She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I spent the rest of the night in my office, going through more bank statements and screenshotting her social media posts. Day 3. I worked from home, watching what Chloe actually did all day. She woke up at 11 a.m., made herself breakfast, spent 2 hours on her phone, went to a yoga class, came home, showered, and then sat on the couch scrolling through shopping apps until I was done working. She didn't clean anything, didn't cook, didn't do laundry, didn't even take out the trash. When I asked her what she did today, she said she was busy and seemed genuinely offended that I was questioning her. That evening, I got a text from Mark. He'd heard from another friend that Chloe had been telling people she was keeping her options open, which was apparently code for already thinking about her next relationship before this one was even over. I didn't confront her about it yet. I was still gathering information, still building my case. But internally, my decision was made. Day 4. I met with the lawyer Mark recommended, a woman named Lisa who specialized in divorce cases. I walked her through everything. She took notes, asked questions about assets and timelines, and told me that if we moved forward, I'd want to act fast, before Chloe figured out what was happening and started hiding things or making accusations. I left her office with a folder full of paperwork and a retainer. Agreement. On my drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like I was back in control of my own life. When I walked through the door that night, Chloe was waiting for me with her arms crossed. I knew from her expression that she'd figured out something had changed. She just didn't know what yet. By day 7, my wife learned what my worth actually was when it disappeared. Day 5 started with me making phone calls from my office at work, the kind of calls you make when you're systematically removing someone from your life. First, I called our phone carrier and moved Chloe's line to a separate account under her name. She could keep the number, but she'd have to pay for it herself starting next month. Then, I called our car insurance company and removed her from my policy. She was listed as a driver on my car, but it was titled in my name only, so legally, I could do this. I updated all my beneficiary information on my life insurance and retirement accounts, changing everything from Chloe to my brother Daniel. I sent an email to HR at work doing the same thing with my health insurance and 401k. The whole process took about 3 hours, and by the time I was done, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy and finally put it down. I left work early and drove straight to Lisa's office where I signed the divorce petition and wrote a check for her retainer. She told me the papers would be ready to serve by tomorrow and asked if I wanted to be there when it happened. I told her no. Just have the process server go to the house in the morning when I was at work. That evening, I came home. Chloe was in the kitchen, making herself a smoothie. She asked me if I'd thought about her evaluation and what changes I was planning to make. I looked at her, standing there in her expensive workout clothes, with her fresh manicure, holding a $400 blender, and I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of it all. I told her I'd thought about it a lot, and I'd have an answer for her tomorrow. She smiled, like she'd already won, and went back to her smoothie. Day 6. Everything fell apart for her. I went to work like normal, and around 10 a.m., I got a text from my neighbor Gary, with a photo attached. He's the retired guy 2 doors down who I helped with his fence last summer. The photo showed Chloe screaming at a process server on our front porch. Apparently, she didn't take the divorce papers well. My phone started blowing up with calls and texts from her, but I ignored all of them. I was in back-to-back meetings all day, and I genuinely didn't have time for her drama. Around 3 p.m., Daniel called and told me I needed to come home, that Chloe's mother, Brenda, had shown up at the house, and they were both losing their minds. I told him I'd be there in 30 minutes, leaving work early for the second day in a row. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked on the street. I could hear yelling from inside the house before I even opened the door. Chloe and Brenda were both in the living room. Chloe was crying, and Brenda was pacing back and forth, talking on her phone. When I walked in, they both turned to look at me like I was the villain in their story. Brenda hung up and immediately started in on me about how I was ruining her daughter's life, abandoning my responsibilities, how no real man would treat his wife this way. I let her finish. Then I very calmly told her that her daughter hadn't worked in 4 months, had spent more than $9,000 of my money on personal luxuries, publicly humiliated me on social media, and gave me a literal performance review like I was her employee. Brenda looked at Chloe for confirmation, and Chloe just stood there crying, not denying any of it. I told them both that I was done with this conversation and that they needed to leave. Brenda said Chloe lived here and didn't have to go anywhere. So, I pulled out my phone and showed them the 30-day notice to vacate that Lisa had drafted. Chloe had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, I could pursue formal eviction if necessary. Brenda's face went red, and she started yelling again, calling me every name she could think of. Chloe just crumpled onto the couch, sobbing. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. I could hear them downstairs for another hour before they finally left. Around 8 o'clock that night, my doorbell rang. When I looked through the window, I saw Chloe standing there with two of her friends. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, she pushed past me into the house. Her friends followed, and suddenly I had 3 women in my living room staging what I guess was supposed to be an intervention. Chloe was calmer now. She wasn't crying anymore, and she told me that she'd overreacted this morning, that she was shocked and hurt, but she was ready to talk rationally now. She said she knew she'd made mistakes, but so had I. That marriage was about compromise, that we could work through this if I just canceled the divorce and gave her another chance. Her friends nodded along like this was a reasonable request, like the last 4 months hadn't happened. I stood there, listening to her talk, and I realized she still didn't get it. She still thought this was negotiable, that she could manipulate her way back into the life she had. When she finally stopped talking, I looked at her and said the only thing that needed to be said. I told her, "You had 7 days, and you wasted all of them." Her face changed. The fake calm disappeared, and she started yelling again about how I never loved her, how I used her, how she gave up everything for me. I didn't argue, because there was no point. I just told her and her friends to leave, and that if they didn't, I'd call the police. They left, but not before Chloe told me I was going to regret this, that she'd take me for everything I had, that I'd end up alone and miserable. I closed the door behind them and changed all the locks that night. I'd ordered new hardware online 2 days ago, and it arrived this morning. Day 7 was quiet. Chloe didn't come by, didn't call, didn't text. I went to work, came home, and spent the evening packing up her belongings into boxes that I'll have delivered to wherever she ends up. I found clothes with tags still on them, shoes she wore once, beauty products that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Every box I packed felt like evidence of how blind I was. How I let someone take advantage of me because I wanted to believe I made the right choice. That night, I slept better than I have in months, because I knew it was finally over. I knew that I was getting my life back, and I knew that Chloe was about to learn a very expensive lesson about what happens when you mistake someone's patience for weakness. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I'm sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee, thinking about how different my life looks now. Chloe tried to fight for alimony, but her lawyer couldn't make a case when she'd only been unemployed for 4 months of our 8-month marriage and had no dependents. Last I heard from Mark, she's working retail at a mall across town, living with 2 roommates in a small apartment, and dealing with credit card debt from trying to maintain her lifestyle after I cut her off. I don't take any pleasure in her struggles, but I also don't feel guilty about them. She made her choices, and these are the consequences. As for me, I got that $2.8 million contract approved 3 weeks after the divorce was filed, which came with a promotion and a significant raise. I've been seeing someone new for about 2 months now, a veterinarian named Dr. Alice, who owns her own practice and insisted on splitting the bill on our first date. She's 30, financially independent. And when I told her about Chloe, she said something that stuck with me. She said that anyone who makes you prove your worth doesn't understand what partnership means. I still think about that performance review sometimes, about how insulting and dehumanizing it was to have my value as a husband reduced to scores and metrics. But I also think about how it was the wake-up call I needed. How, without that moment of clarity, I might have stayed in that marriage for years, slowly losing myself while Chloe drained my bank account and my self-respect. She wanted to evaluate my worth, and in doing so, she revealed her own, or rather, the complete absence of it. This entire ordeal was a brutal lesson, but it taught me that self-preservation isn't selfish, and true partnership means mutual respect, not constant audits. But what do you think? If someone handed you a performance review for your marriage, how would you react? Let me know in the comments below.